Welcome to this programme looking at the recent changes to BS 8300, design of buildings and their approaches to meet the needs of disabled people. As a code of practice, this document provides guidance and recommendations only. It is not a statutory document. This is a full amendment to the previous, the 2001 version, and includes changes brought about by active lobbying by disability groups. To discuss the changes, we're fortunate to have Fausto Pereira, a director with PH Partnership. Fausto is an architect with special expertise in designing for people with disabilities and access-related issues. He's a National Register of Access Consultants assessor and was also the Vice Chair and CPD Coordinator for the North East branch of the Access Association. He's also a visiting lecturer teaching accessible design at Newcastle University. So thanks for joining us today. Let's start by looking at some of the changes between this new version and the previous one. And now, the 2005 amendment to the 2001 version, light reflectance values have become much more important, haven't they?
Yes, they have. I mean, it's an area that's benefited from recent research. I mean, visual contrast is very important for people with visual impairments. The British standard now recommends that when you're comparing two different surfaces, that the light reflectance value, or LRV, that there is a difference of 30 points or more. And if that is achieved, it is perceived that there's good visual contrast.
There's sufficient contrast between the two.
Right.
And there's also a test, isn't there, on how to test for light reflectances?
Yes. I mean, the British standard actually gives a table with the light reflectance values of standard colours, which helps sort of architects and designers.
Yes.
But also, it is hoped that the manufacturers themselves would start using the British standard to actually test their own products and publish them with their technical information.
Yes, and there's a point system, isn't there, for this light reflectance value? How does that work?
That's right. It goes from 0 to 100, where 0 is perceived as absolute black, and 100 is perceived as absolute white. And different colours will have different values within that. It's not a system that's perfect because there's very little information on how light reflectance values are perceived externally, especially in external environments. So there's a little bit of sort of research to be done on that.
But in a nutshell, something that has the same light reflectance value as something else is going to be almost impossible to tell the difference between it, so you're not going to be able to see the difference, are you?
That's right. It's all about contrast.
It's all about the contrast. Yeah. Now, on door ironmongery, it says it should be possible to operate all door-opening furniture one-handed without the need to grasp or twist. Now, what's the implication of this?
The implications are that the standard pretty much recommends that sort of knob-type furniture shouldn't be used, or small thumb turns. And basically because they're very difficult to operate by people with limited dexterity or arthritis or a weak grip. So whenever possible, sort of lever-type furniture should be used. OK, so it limits the sort of door-closing furniture that you can use. What about those door closers, those things that notoriously slam the door shut on your...
Yes, sometimes they're surprisingly tough to
operate, aren't they?
Yeah,
they can be. The British standard does recommend a certain amount of opening force, which is measured at the leading edge of the door. And the idea is that between 0 and 30 degrees, you can have an opening force of 30 newtons. And between sort of 30 degrees and 60, that force can drop to 22.5 newtons. And that's measured at sort of the leading edge of the door. It is notoriously difficult to actually measure it on site.
Yes.
So the British standard actually gives it a sort of leeway of 2 to 3 newtons to allow you to take account of the site situation.
And again, with door handles, light reflectance is important, isn't it? The BS says that the difference should be at least 15 points.
That's right. door handles and door furniture is slightly different because obviously it's got a three-dimensional element to it in relation to a flat surface. So the way that the light is reflected off a door handle and also the sort of the shiny reflections of the metal means that you're allowed a smaller difference in terms of the point difference between the actual handle and the background.
OK. Well, moving on, the guidance relating to housing has been taken out of the new BS. Now, why is that?
Well, the British standard still is still relevant for certain residential accommodation like hotels, halls of residence, and similar accommodation. But the recommendations regarding dwellings has actually been excluded because there's another document called DD 266, which basically provides information on sort of lifetime homes. So that's really the document to refer to regarding dwelling houses.
OK. Well, just to say, homeowners might be happy to know that Appendix A states that windows must be kept clean to maximise lighting. So window cleaners everywhere will be delighted to know that dirty windows are now a disability access issue. Well, OK, let's move on to the revised recommendations for stairs and steps. Now, there appears to be a recommendation that stair tread should be at least 300 millimetres or even 350 millimetres. What's the thinking behind this?
It came from research, basically, that it was perceived that slips were caused by sort of overstepping. And that meant that people were only really achieving 50 or 60% of the surface of the foot on the actual tread. So the outcome of that was that with a 350 millimetre going on a stair, that dramatically decreased the potential for slips on stairs.
OK, and an external ramp should now have a landing for every 500 millimetres of rise. Now, isn't that going to make the ramps quite a bit longer?
Ramps require landings at the top and at the bottom of the flights. And also where a ramp changes direction, you have to provide a landing. The standard actually recommends the provision of landings relating to specific flights of ramps. So if you have a 1 in 12 ramp, you're only really allowed a maximum flight of 2 meters, say, and you need to provide a landing at the bottom and the top of each flight.
Yes. There's a recommendation that a corduroy hazard warning surface should be at the top and the bottom of all external stairs. This presumably is a tactile thing, is it?
It is. It refers to the type of the tactile paving, and there are several types of tactile paving that signify different hazards. The corduroy is used at the top and the bottom of staircases. To identify that as a hazard. Yeah. It's worthwhile stressing that corduroy paving is not recommended for internal stairs, which was previously, but now it's only recommended for external stairs.
Ideally, handrails should be 50 millimetres wide and 38 millimetres deep, or circular ones should be between 32 and 45 millimetres in diameter. And there must be a clearance of 60 to 75 millimetres between the handle and the wall. Fausto, is there anything else to mention on that?
Yes, there are other requirements. Obviously, handrails need to be sort of securely fixed. Also, they need to project 300 millimetres at the end of the riser and at the top of the riser if the layout allows that. Also, balustrades need to withstand the impact of a wheelchair, generally handrails need to be to a specific diameter as well, as you mentioned.
Okay. Moving on to vision panels indoors, and it's still 500 millimetres to the bottom and 1500 millimetres to the top of clear views through vision panels. As opposed to approved document M, the new BS has clarified the permissible obstruction to that clear view. So is that more or less right then, Fausto?
It is. There was a lot of criticism within the industry that the previous standard actually meant that door designs were very institutionalized with a sort of very long, thin vision panel. So that was recognized, and the new standard allows for obstructions of about 350 millimeters. But it means that they can be kind of sort of added up within the design of the door rather than... It means designers and architects have got a lot of freedom.
More freedom to make an aesthetic-looking door.
Absolutely,
now.
yes. Yeah.
Means of escape, too, is a big issue to be dealt with here, and it's documented in a new code of practice, BS 9999. Alarms are now required to be visible as well as audible to all users. Are these easy to specify?
Fortunately, sort of so-called flashing beacons are becoming an industry standard, so they can be found quite easily within specifications nowadays. There are also sort of vibrating type of alarm systems that are linked to the fire alarm. So when the fire alarm is triggered, designated users will have a vibrating pager and they receive a signal, which means they can be in any area of the building, a basement or somewhere where they're on their own, and they'll still be alerted by the fire alarm.
A major change in the BS, the issue of adult changing facilities. Let's look at this issue in some detail.
A changing places facility is a combined toilet, shower and changing room for use by people with complex and multiple disabilities who require the help of up to 2 assistants. It should be provided in certain public access buildings like transport interchanges, motorway services, museums and galleries, hotels and leisure facilities, shopping centres, libraries, schools and health centres. Effectively, changing places are an additional and extended provision to the standard wheelchair accessible toilets. Changing places must be at least 3 metres by 4 metres, with provision for a 1.8 metre long adult changing bench, full track hoist mechanism and a floor drain. They need to have adequate room heating, and they must be additional to the statutory accessible toilets and baby changing facilities.
Changing places, quite well named, isn't it? Because it is quite a big change.
Yeah, yes, it is. It's a very welcome change because it's based on the real need of real people. So it was a very welcome addition to the standard. I mean, as a practice, we've been supporting the Changing Places campaign for over 4 years now, and we've actually been involved in the design of several facilities. So it's good to see that it's made it to the British standard.
And do you think it's possible that even though BS 8300 isn't statutory, that councils could include it in their planning applications as as part of their planning conditions?
Yes, I mean the local authorities have got a duty to promote disability. So one would hope that they would include the provision of changing places facilities as part of their development briefs, and also that private clients will see that provision as a way of discharging their duties under the Disability Discrimination Act.
It also recommends that a power-assisted adjustable height wash basin and support rail should be provided. Now, how much is all this sort of thing going to cost?
Well, the changing places facilities will require some specialist equipment, which can be expensive. One hopes that with the use of more facilities, that the cost of these elements of equipment can be reduced. The other thing to consider as well is that they're mainly recommended for fairly large projects. So a changing places facility is going to be a small portion of the overall budget.
Moving on to hotels, one of the facilities recommended to incorporate changing places, there's a change to the number of accessible bedrooms. Now, what's the new recommendation here?
Well, the recommendation in the new standard is that 5% of the total accommodation should be provided with hoists. 5% should be provided without any hoists. And another 5% should be provided to allow future implementation of hoists if required.
Okay. Speaking of the common use of the phrase changing places, unisex accessible fitting rooms in shops should now be at least 2 metres by 2.2 metres.
Yes. Fortunately, you only really require one. They don't have to all be that size. But the thinking behind the size is that obviously it needs to accommodate 2 people, and potentially a wheelchair user and a carer. So the size has been optimised for that use.
Yes, it'd be nice if it were all that sort of size, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think retailers would have a bit of a problem with
the floor
that.
space would be
that's right.
too expensive.
Yeah.
So is this code of practice then using universal design principles? Is it trying to design for the benefit of everyone rather than specific groups, do you think?
It tries to aim at inclusive design, and inclusive design is one that benefits everybody in society. So it's a welcome addition, really.
Yes, but the idea of designing for everyone, doesn't it result in a certain amount of over-design, for instance, a different height of rails? Don't you end up with, instead of it all being a bit of a dog's dinner rather than aesthetically pleasing?
Inclusive design benefits not just disabled people. It benefits children, it benefits people who are elderly, it benefits parents with prams, it benefits somebody who has a sort of temporary disability, a hip operation or something similar. So in a way, inclusive design is good design rather than over-design.
OK. What about the suitable arrangements that have to be made for assistance dogs whilst their owners are using leisure facilities?
Yes, the standard does make a recommendation that the needs of assistance and guide dogs needs to be taken into consideration. I think it's worthwhile stressing that guide dogs and assistant dogs are not pets. They're working dogs, and people do rely very heavily on them for mobility and independence. The requirements in the standard tend to relate to practices, policies and procedures. So, for example, ensuring that there isn't a sort of no dogs policy. They're quite easy things to implement. I mean, on the physical side, they relate mainly to, for example, in stadia, ensuring that turnstiles allow somebody to pass through with a dog, and that the seating areas also have adequate space for a dog to sit next to the owner.
Yeah.
And in very large schemes like stadia, for example, that provision for an area for relief of dogs will be provided.
Yes.
So it's not an onerous requirement, really.
Yeah. Let's move on to car parking, something dear to everyone's heart. The provision has been revised upwards for some purpose groups, hasn't it? And it's not just more bays, it's bigger bays, isn't it?
There are provisions for larger bays, and also the requirement for bays that can be adapted to accessible bays in the future. Wherever space is available as well, there is a provision for bays for people who use hoists or ramps.
Yes.
Out of their vehicles. And for that, they need that extra little bit of space.
OK. Actually, there are some very useful diagrams in the appendices, a la metric handbook, that spell out the space requirements for various activities, from using a wheelchair ramp into the rear of a vehicle or the width of sweep required by a blind person with a cane. And finally, there's information relating to the management and maintenance of the buildings contained in the annex. What about that, Fausto?
Yes, management of a building is important to ensure that access and usability of the building continues throughout its life. As an example, management procedures need to be in place to ensure that accessible WCs aren't used as storage cupboards.
Right. Yes.
So there are a number of recommendations that are important for the life of the building.
OK, well, Fausto, thanks very much for that romp through all those regulations. And please have a look through the study notes. And if you have any queries about BS 8300, please do get in touch. So until next time, from Fausto and from me, goodbye.